Today we're going to be talking about testing for a life of vitality. Thank you all so much for joining. And today's webinar is sponsored by Brighten Heights. Brighten Heights will be a first of its kind community, a senior living community in Pee Wee Valley, Kentucky. Brighten Heights will promote a life of healthy living and change amongst seniors and expected to welcome our first residents in 2024. For more information on Brighten Heights, you can visit the Brighten Heights website at brightenheights.org. Here in a moment, I will introduce our guest speaker, but I first want to give you a few housekeeping items. The first thing is that if you'd like to ask any questions, you can do that through the chat window, or if you are joining us through Facebook Live, feel free to leave your questions in the comments section. We will monitor them throughout and we will ask them at the end of the webinar. Now I'd like to introduce you to Dr. Youngberg. He has his primary focus in his daily practice at the Youngberg Lifestyle Medicine Clinic in Temecula, California. Although he does quite a bit of his visits with patients through Zoom, etc., all over the country and all over the world. He's an assistant clinical professor at the Schools of Medicine and Public Health at Loma Linda University and a fellow and founding director of the American College of Lifestyle Medicine. He has written 3 books, including Hello Healthy, Goodbye Diabetes, and Memory Makeover. And he regularly speaks and writes publications on these topics. So in the last episode, we discussed ways you can optimize your diet, and you're welcome to go back and watch any of our prior 6 episodes. You can find them through our website, as well as going directly to our Facebook page or through our YouTube channel. Now, a special treat for today is Dr. Youngberg is going to be sharing some resources and making them available to you about testing. And we'll have information about this throughout the webinar, but you can access those through our brightenheights.org website /resources. I'd like to now transition it over to Dr. Youngberg. And Dr. Youngberg, I know you're coming back any second now. To talk to us about lab testing.
Yeah, it was great to be with you again, and didn't mean to stress you out there, Susan. I realized that I'd opened my windows that are against the street, and when trucks drive by, we didn't want the extra noise. So I thought I'd do that now instead of later. But this is actually one of my favorite topics because it really shows us what we can do right now to better understand our health so that, well, we know what to do because a lot of people have no idea. They get a diagnosis, hypertension, diabetes, high cholesterol, mild cognitive impairment, heart disease, you name it. So besides taking whatever medicine was prescribed to you, what else can you do? And of course, many of us know there's various things that can be done, but how we know precisely what else needs to be done is best initially determined by doing a broader based evaluation or assessment of our health. And that's something that I've specialized in now for the last 30 years with my patients is kind of taking a broader view. Let's take a step back and really figure out what are the underlying issues that created this problem in the first place. Or if we just have a family history, you know, what are the things happening inside of me right now that might make me one more statistic in that family history chain? For instance, when I was still in college, one of my uncles, my father's next older brother, who is a physician, he was an ER doctor working in an ER in Texas, while at the ER, died of a massive heart attack. Okay, now he didn't go to the ER because he was having a heart attack. He was a doctor in the ER when he had the heart attack and they couldn't save him. So you know that was a pretty bad heart attack. And I remember I was at his wedding, as so many of our family, and I come from a large medical family. I have like 15 aunts and uncles and cousins, first cousins that are physicians. And so we were obviously sad that he had to die so young in his mid 50s, right? And I'm in my 60s now, so I'm thinking I need to make sure I'm doing something to protect myself. But even at that time, I started thinking, what is the impact of my uncle dying of a massive heart attack? Then I remembered that my grandfather, his father, right? My grandfather died of a heart attack as well in his late 60s. And so I started putting two and two together and realizing, wow, I come from a family where it's kind of normal to die of heart disease, right? And so that's one of the main themes that I want to share with our team today is understanding that there's a difference between what is normal and what is optimal. And that also is true when we're looking at laboratory testing. To call something normal simply means statistically average. That's what it means. Okay, it doesn't mean it's healthy. No, normal is very rarely healthy. Unfortunately, you almost have to be abnormal in a good way, right? You have to be abnormal in a positive way, in a healthy way. You want to be the healthy minority, because the majority of adults aren't really that healthy. And so we don't want to be caught up in this idea, well, everybody else has the same thing. Must be normal, right? It must be okay. No big deal. We're all in this together. Well, we're all in it together in terms of it dramatically decreasing our life expectancy. And more importantly than that even is decreasing the vitality of life while we do have it, right? So what's the point of living longer if you're just going to be suffering longer, right? But what if you could live longer and feel younger and more vitality than you even had 10 years ago? Would that be worth living longer? And I would say, absolutely. I'm reminded by a patient of mine. This was over about 25 years ago. So it made more of an impression on me then. She was turning 62. I'm 61. Okay, now, right? Now, back then I was much younger, but she was turning 62 and she said, Dr. Youngberg, I don't want to live past age 65. I go like, what? So that's only a couple years away. And she says, yeah, I said, why 65? Why is that the magic number? And she says, because I have so many relatives. She came from a big extended family, and she'd seen aunt and uncle and older brother and sister, so many family members. By about the time they turned age 65, their health would take a dive and they would become a tremendous burden on the rest of the family and to themselves. And they weren't happy. They weren't functional. And so she says, I don't want to live past 65. And so, for me, that would make it even a bigger impact on me right now, because, I'm really close to 65. And so I said to her, says, what if we could improve your health so much that when you turn 65, you feel more like 40? Would you still want to die at 65? She says, oh, no, I wouldn't want to die then. I said, well, that's what you're here for then, right? And so I kind of helped change her thinking about what was possible. And so lab testing is all about hope, literally. In fact, the more bad things we find on the lab test, the more hope you can have. You know why? Because when we find things that we didn't know we had before that were risk factors for various illnesses or health conditions, we now have an additional level of strategies that we can take advantage of to improve our overall health. That's the beauty of a risk factor assessment. So that's the introduction for what we're going to be addressing today. And I'm going to show you 3 resources that are going to be available to you that Katie is going to put a link into the chat, and there's also going to be a link on the Brighten Heights website for additional resources. And so if you want these resources, all you got to do is just put in your email, just so that we have your information. And so you can get our regular emails as well about other programs. Next month, we're going to be doing one on how do you know what supplements are the best for you? Well, one way is to understand what your labs are, right? So we always look at the labs first. And from the labs, we kind of know how to fine tune your nutritional supplement program and your diet and everything about your health. So take advantage of these resources that are going to be available to you. And so I'm going to go ahead and share screen. And I'm going to show you these three resources. And then I'm going to show you an actual lab with names blotted out that I've just recently gone over with patients and kind of walk you through that. So there's 4 things that we're going to be looking at. 3 of them are available for you to download anytime while you're watching this or afterwards. Okay, so I'm going to share screen. And so the first handout here is actually 48 pages from my book Hello Healthy. That's a lot. Okay, again, totally free, and it's highlighting chapter 10 of my book Hello Healthy. Now, some of you may know I wrote a book called Goodbye Diabetes. In other words, what can you do to get rid of diabetes, to say goodbye to diabetes? And then when I was thinking about a title for my next book, a book that was really looking at all the things I would want new patients to understand about their health and about what we were going to be doing so that they can be informed consumers of healthcare. These are 12 different key themes that I actually, for 25 years, did basically a seminar series at our clinic. Every week I was doing this for 12 weeks straight. Somebody could just come in anytime and go 12 weeks and learn these 12 themes that now ended up being the 12 chapters of the book Hello Healthy. In other words, say hello to a life free from disease. Hello Healthy is what I would want somebody to say to me. If I had had some health issues in the past, maybe wasn't super healthy, right? And then a couple of years later, they run into me at the grocery store or wherever, and they go like, wow, Hello Healthy, what happened to you, right? That was the kind of the theme of like, what can we do to transform our health? So now the statement about it says, Hello Healthy, man. What can I do to be healthy like you? So these are strategies to reach your full health and wellness potential. If you want to get the whole book, there's going to, and of course you don't have to, but if you want to get the whole book, there's going to be a link on how you can get that, and I can even sign that for you if you wish. Now let's jump right into this. So these were the 12 seminars that I did for over 25 years to my patients. Okay, the genetics, and we're going to be touching based on some of the genetic tests and why they're so important in this discussion today. The importance of diet and exercise, obviously very critical, but looking at that through some really interesting case studies. Optimizing circulation and cardiovascular health, vitamin D and sunlight, right? If there was ever a time to optimize vitamin D, it's right now because of COVID-19, et cetera, and viral pandemics. Vitamin D is one of the most important things you can do, a whole chapter on that. Optimizing digestion. Optimizing stress and emotional health, and adrenal fatigue. We'll be looking at labs specifically that I recommend to anybody who's just tired all the time and doesn't understand why. And they go to the doctor and they say, hey, all my labs are normal, so it must be all in your head. Well, no, it's not all in your head. They're not doing the right labs. Of course, they're not going to find anything in the labs that they're ordering because those are different type of labs. But if we look at labs that specifically evaluating adrenal health, then we can pick up that issue with why somebody is so tired. Attitudes and healing, huge. All my books were written primarily to give people hope that this is doable. We just got to figure out how to do it. And the first step is lab testing. Chronic kidney disease. We'll touch on that today. Autoimmune disease. We'll touch on that today. Detoxification, how sleep impacts, and then basically chapter 12, which is the chapter that you're downloading for free. That's part of this handout. Is basically looking at the best clinical labs. And so we'll look at this handout and summarize it here in a few minutes. I'm going to first show you some of the other handouts. Here's another handout. It's a 2-page handout that talks about how to test your blood sugars at home. You can just go to the pharmacy, get yourself a little home monitor for your blood sugars. You don't need a prescription for that. You can just buy it yourself and start checking your blood sugars. Why? Because at least half of us adults have prediabetes, and very few of us, maybe only 10% of those of us who have prediabetes know it. How are you going to know unless you test? And so one of the ways you can test is do it at home. And this walks you through the strategies about just checking your blood sugars before 1 hour and 2 hours after the start of each meal, and do a splurge meal. Get a pancake breakfast and check your blood sugar an hour later. Okay. Chances are, okay, especially if you do that fairly frequently, your blood sugars are going to be high 1 hour. They're going to be high in the sense of this is a problem. Okay, not just because you ate pancakes, but your blood sugar should never be high for any reason. Okay, but when it does go high, that means your body has lost its ability to properly control blood sugars, at least temporarily, until you start getting healthy again. So anyway, so this is a handout that we're going to go over. And then there's another handout that you can download, and it's my book, Memory Makeover: How to Prevent Alzheimer's and Reverse Cognitive Decline the Natural Way. What I've done here is I have included, this is basically another book to give people hope who may have a family history of dementia, of cognitive decline. They may have noticed that, man, I'm starting to not remember things as well. I'm struggling with names, or, what is that thing? Oh, this thing. Oh, that's a pen, right? I mean, just simple things that you should easily know, that for some reason, it's just not coming to mind until maybe 5 minutes later. You're like, oh yeah, that's a pen. I knew what it was. I just couldn't think of the word for it. Those are signs of early cognitive decline, that something's going on in the brain where you're actually losing neurons in the hippocampal areas of the brain, the part of the brain that controls short and long-term memory. So the book was written to give people hope. Even in advanced Alzheimer's, there's hope, and this is a key example of it. So what I've done is chapters 5 and 6 are powerful, reviewing the information about the glucose tolerance test and how blood sugars, high sugars, low sugars, high insulin levels, high cortisol levels, low cortisol levels, how all those dramatically impact cognitive issues, and why we got to keep that balance properly. And so that's discussed in chapters 5 and 6. But what I wanted to share with you for today's topic in this free downloadable chapter is chapter 10, which is entitled The Tenets of the Bredesen Protocol, which of course starts with comprehensive lab testing. Any good health program, okay, that is worthwhile is going to start with a significant level of health assessment. Because otherwise, how are you going to know what to do? How do you know what the problem is? You got to start with a comprehensive health assessment, which includes genetic assessment as well, but primarily a significant amount of lab testing. And so that entire section and chapter is part of this handout as well. And then thirdly, if I can find it, here we go. Okay, the last thing, that this is not a downloadable, because this is an actual lab that I'm just going to use to review some concepts with you. You know, when I work with patients on Zoom, just like we're doing right now, I actually take their labs, put them up online, and we just go over them. And we talk about each of the labs. And then I write up some recommendations based on the labs. Without the labs, I'd be hemming and hawing and guessing what to do, right? So we want to start with objective analysis. So I'm going to go over all these results briefly with you, highlighting some things like kidney function, liver function. We'll be looking at do you have enough of the omega-3 fatty acids, EPA, DHA? Most people don't. Why? Well, because they don't think it's a problem. Why? Because they've never tested it. They just assume they're okay with what they're doing. And we can prove by doing an assessment of your own blood, no, you don't have enough of that. And that helps you realize, okay, that's it's not just somebody saying you need to do this. It's somebody saying, look at the labs. The labs don't lie, right? The labs tell you the truth. All right, and then the glucose tolerance test, powerful test to show you, do you have tendency to spiking blood sugars, crashing blood sugars, and do you have a tendency to have insulin levels that go sky high? Even though your fasting insulin might be near perfect, what is your 1 hour and your 2 hour insulin level? Okay, that's the true sign of metabolic health, is not what happens while you're fasting, but what happens after you get exposed to a sugary meal or a high carbohydrate meal. Okay, and then various hormones, thyroid function, vitamin D levels, advanced cardiovascular testing like lipoprotein A, C-reactive protein, pyrroles, magnesium, copper, zinc ratios, iron in the storage form of iron, ferritin, and so forth. So we're gonna look at that as well. Now, okay, so let's jump right into this. There's a lot to cover, and don't hesitate to write your questions in the chat, and we're gonna take time to answer questions today. So don't hesitate to ask questions that we can address at the end of the program. Okay. All right.
So Dr. Youngberg, could I just make one kind of humorous comment?
Of course.
So many years ago, my daughters and I were to get our lab testing done at our general practitioner's office, and for some reason they needed us to come back later. And so I'm just going to use this word stupidly, we went across the street to Dairy Queen, and we each had a blizzard. So when you say labs don't lie, if you do eat a blizzard right before lab testing, they will come back very whacked out. And that's exactly what happened. She was greatly disturbed when she went to go over them with us. But when I told her what we'd done, she said, well, you know what, we just have to redo this whole thing, but don't eat a blizzard before you come.
Yeah, that's a great idea. Now, you know what I do now is I tell people, go ahead and eat a blizzard if you're going to be doing certain tests, because that's going to show you what it does to your body, right? I mean, you know, we all know that blizzards taste wonderful, okay? But if we knew the impact that it had on our lipids, our cholesterol, and our blood sugar levels and our insulin response, at least we'd maybe think twice about it, right? In terms of what we do on a regular basis. So, all right, so basically choosing the best labs. Thank you for that quick story. Appreciated that. So bottom line is, how do we initiate an effective wellness program? Well, that begins, and I'll read it. The first step in properly understanding and then treating the main causes of disease is assessment. You need to ask, where are my gaps in my journey of wellness? Where are the potholes that can trip me up and create barriers to healing unless they are discovered and addressed directly? You can't address something directly if you don't know what it is, okay? That's the key then for assessment. So it reminds me of one of my favorite quotes from Cicero, who was he was an orator, a philosopher around the time of Christ. He's a Roman philosopher who said this: old age must be resisted and its deficiencies supplied. And that's brilliant. So as we get older, at any age, really, at any age, even as children are getting older, they need to supply their deficiencies. Okay, and you can have deficiency syndrome illness at any age. Deficiencies in your immune system, deficiencies in your cardiovascular system, the neurologic system, and so forth. And so how do we supply those deficiencies? Well, one of the best ways is do testing and do genetic testing as well. Okay, so one of the critical principles in gene testing is that one gene does not a person make, I say. Having one mutated gene or one normal gene doesn't determine who you are. So if you do, for instance, the MTHFR gene test, which was really popular over the last 10 years, has been a very popular gene test. And I do that on every patient, right? Through saliva testing. I just use 23andMe as the base for doing all the genetic testing. It's very cheap to do it that way. And those MTHFR mutations, which are extremely common, that's why I test everybody on it. About a third of the population has some major mutation to the ability to methylate or activate the vitamin folate, vitamin B9, one of the B vitamins. Well, you know what that does? That mutation impairs detoxification in the body at every cell, at the level of every cell. It impairs DNA repair at the level of every cell. It impairs, not completely, but it minimizes its normal function, right? It decreases the ability to protect against viral replication. You think that'd be important in the age of COVID-19 to slow down viruses from replicating inside our cells? Yeah, so MTHFR mutations make that more of a problem. And so the beauty of genetics is that we know when we do those tests, by understanding where the mutation is, we know precisely where on that biochemical pathway in your body, inside your cell, the problem is. And so we can, and that mutation basically means that there's an enzyme as part of that metabolic biochemical pathway that's not working as well, that therefore needs more of its cofactors. And guess what the cofactors are for dysfunctional or functional enzymes? Vitamins and minerals. So instead of following some outdated mode of the recommended daily allowance or the recommended daily intake, which is just a statistical number, assuming you're like everybody else. And who is like everybody else? Very few people, right? Because we're all different. Okay, so you are now able to, through genetic understanding of your own body and what your mutations are, you can optimize the activity of that enzyme that's dysfunctional because of the mutation and improve your health dramatically. And we're going to be talking more about that next month as we look at how do we know what supplements to take? Well, part of it is knowing our genetic mutations, right? And I'm going to be sharing information from Dr. Bruce Ames, who's a famous professor at Berkeley in California. Also been a professor in genetics and biochemical metabolism. And he talks about fine-tuning your metabolism through a genetic understanding. Okay, so we're going to be sharing that more next month. Well, okay, so the first thing that I want to really drive home here is a study that was done by Dr. David Eddy. He's an MD PhD. He actually had a PhD in mathematics. He talks about growing up, he had ADHD, and so he couldn't read. He couldn't learn from reading like the average person or student does. But he was brilliant. He could just listen to you and understand it much better. He was a visual learner, not a book learner. A lot of us are that way. I'm kind of that way as well. And but when he got into mathematics, it just came alive for him. He just understood it, right? He was like a mathematics savant. And so he tied that in with his medical training, and he figured out how to do studies without doing studies with human subjects. I mean, what he did is he took real people, put all their data into the NIH data bank, okay, and National Institutes of Health data bank. And then he only modified one risk factor from age 20 until age 80 for 60 years on the computer. And he was able to call it the Archimedes Study. It was a brilliant, brilliant study where he could, in a matter of just days, do a 60-year study on a huge population using basically evidence-based medicine strategies on the computer. And so they call it the Archimedes Study. Huge study published in the journal Diabetes Care some years ago. He's published many studies actually. Okay, and basically what he showed. Let me get to that. Okay, what he showed was in this 60-year study on the computer that the number one cause of heart attacks was insulin resistance. It wasn't high cholesterol. High blood pressure was a significant contributor, but not nearly as high as insulin resistance. Even smoking was only had about a fourth of the impact on heart disease as insulin resistance did. And so the problem is nobody really understands what insulin resistance is. So we're going to be highlighting this today in our discussion. Insulin resistance is basically the muscle and the liver cells becoming insensitive to the action of insulin, which is trying to take sugar out of your blood and store it into your cells. That's by definition insulin resistance. And so what we want to do is get the reverse. We want to improve sensitivity of the receptors on the muscle cells and the liver cells for insulin. So when insulin is present, it'll stimulate blood sugars leaving the blood and going into the cell to keep your blood sugar stable. Otherwise, your blood sugars shoot up after a meal. And that's why we want to do a better job of controlling blood sugars after the meal through all kinds of strategies, and we'll get into that later on. But the first thing is proper assessment. And so basically, Dr. David Eddy, he discovered that almost half of all heart attacks during that 60-year period from age 20 to age 80 were due to insulin resistance, were due to this blood sugar spiking and insulin spiking that threw the metabolism off. Okay, now, so how do we figure that out? Okay, so basically, we've discovered that checking the blood sugars, and again, you're going to have this, you can download this whole section of 40-some pages free, and you can read over this on your own. I'm just kind of cluing you into some of the key concepts. So checking your blood sugars 1 and 2 hours after a sweet drink or a starchy meal is far more sensitive in indicating not only diabetes and pre-diabetes, but also the underlying insulin resistance. Now, why do I think that you should do this? Well, because statistically speaking, okay, unless you know otherwise, you probably have pre-diabetes at minimum. In other words, I've been practicing lifestyle medicine and nutritional medicine for now over 30 years. Okay, and I started when I was 30. Okay, so that dates me, I know, but the bottom line is that if you're between the ages of 40 and 59, half of you are at least pre-diabetic. If you're between the ages of 60 and 74, 2/3 of us, I'm in that category, are at least pre-diabetic. And if you're over the age of 74 or 74 or older, okay, 3/4 of you are at least pre-diabetic. Or in other words, everybody should do this type of checking. Okay, and so I'm going to give you a couple ideas of how to do that effectively. Now, let me see here. Yeah, so we have the glucose tolerance test, which I'll show you in detail on the lab section. If your blood sugar 1 hour after any meal, or even if it's just pure sugar, you just drink a regular soda, and 1 hour after drinking that, your blood sugar is 155 or higher, that is an independent risk factor for progressive cardiovascular disease, but it's also a risk factor for hypertension. It's also a major risk factor for developing dementia. Why? Because it's the #1 driver of all those things. And it's a major driver of common cancers as well. Breast cancer, ovarian cancer, prostate cancer, colon cancer, skin cancer, driven aggressively through insulin resistance. So that's why these principles in doing the right testing is so important. Okay, so one of the things that I started years ago when I was practicing on the island of Guam, I was a medical missionary there for 14 years with the Seventh-day Adventist Church. And we had a big medical center, about 300 employees. And we would spend many weekends out doing screening to help people understand. And the screening, I called it the Jelly Bean Challenge. So, this dates me as well, but years ago, Pepsi would have this commercial, the Pepsi challenge, looking at is what's better, Coke or Pepsi, right? And they're just trying to promote themselves by having this competition. And so I call it the Pepsi Jelly Bean Challenge. I remember a lean, fit-looking guy came riding up on his 10-speed bike. He was, wearing his colorful gear, and he came up to our screening booth at one of the fairs we were doing one Sunday morning. And he says, "What are you guys doing?" I said, "We're checking everybody's blood sugars." And he said, "Well, hey, can you check my blood sugars?" I said, "Sure." He says, "But why don't you first go and have your favorite soft drink or fruit juice if you want, and come back in about 45 minutes. He says, "Okay," because I knew since he'd been riding his bike, his blood sugars would be lower. So he went and went to the fair and got some sweets, and he came back about 45 to an hour later, and we checked his blood sugar, and his blood sugars were almost 200. He was a lean, fit individual, but when he had sugar, his blood sugar shot up, which means what? Which means that he was rapidly on the road to prediabetes and diabetes, and just simply exercising it or being fit wasn't the fix. Now, that's an important part of it, by the way, but by itself, it's not enough. So that's why testing can be so important. Many of us think, "Oh, I'm really fit, I'm healthier than most of my friends," but that doesn't mean anything. Just because you seem to be healthier than your friends doesn't mean you are. Remember, because you're genetically unique. Your friends might not eat as well as you, might not exercise as well as you, but genetically they may be healthier than you, okay? And therefore they're at less risk than you are. And so some of us need to kind of step up our game because we have genetic issues that we need to control for. I'm certainly in that category myself. So the Pepsi Jelly Bean Challenge is basically doing a home-based glucose tolerance test when you take 300 calories of carbohydrates, and you eat that and then check your blood sugar 1 hour after the beginning of eating that. That'll tell you if your blood sugar at 1 hour is above 140, that's starting to tell you that there's something is not right and we need to fix that. So you can read over that on your own. Okay, now let me go a couple more things on here. There was a question that came in from one of our viewers that basically said this: "I am a full-blown type 2 diabetic, 29 years, and over the past several years, I have been taking small doses of insulin, Lantus, and rapid-acting insulin when I eat some carbs. I would like to know if taking this glucose tolerance test will tell me if my pancreas is still producing insulin, or am I really dealing with insulin resistance? Because I would really like to get off the insulin if possible." The answer is absolutely, this is the right test for you. And not only would you do the glucose tolerance test with insulin levels to see how your insulin levels are, that combines the insulin you're injecting into your body and the insulin your pancreas is producing, but then we'd also do this test, called the C-Peptide Test, okay, where you literally take the C-Peptide Test, which is just it's a test like insulin, only it's different than the insulin that you're injecting. Therefore, we can tell the difference, how much insulin your body's able to make compared to the combination of insulin you're injecting and the insulin that you're producing. Okay, so that C-Peptide test is part of that, and we'll go over the glucose tolerance test in a bit. Okay, then we have testing for ferritin. I mean, I can tell you so many stories. This is the storage form of iron. Not a month or two go by without me finding somebody has a super high level of ferritin. That means you have an iron storage disease or hemochromatosis or hemosiderosis. And this is a genetic thing that we can find out through gene testing as well. But it just tells you that your body has this high level of inflammatory ferritin that is causing oxidative stress throughout everywhere blood goes. And that can cause diabetes early. It can cause heart attacks early. It can cause cancer early. And I have various stories about that in the handout that we don't have time to go over right now. Okay, so and then I'll just say one thing about the comprehensive metabolic profile. We're gonna look at that in a little bit. In fact, let me just jump to that right now. The comprehensive metabolic profile. Let's see here it is. So it starts right here. Okay, so on this person, their fasting blood sugar is 106. They actually tested it twice because on the glucose tolerance test here, they checked it again and it was 112. It's not unusual to see at least a 10% variation in numbers when you do this testing. In other words, this person already had advanced pre-diabetes even before doing the glucose tolerance test. But then look what happened to the blood sugars. Above 200 at half hour, almost 200 at 1 hour, and then coming down rapidly to a critically, they had to call us from the lab. They say, hey, your patient had a critically low blood sugar. And that means that basically blood sugars went sky high and then bottomed out. Why? Because of all the excess insulin that person produced. Started out okay, only under 10 fasting, but as soon as she drank that drink, the pancreas cranked out a huge amount of insulin. This should not have gone above 30. It was 281. All that insulin flowing around through the body, causing all kinds of problems with the brain and the heart and the cardiovascular system, the immune system, and then ultimately causing that blood sugar to be stored way too rapidly, causing a critically low blood sugar. This happens all the time. I get calls from the lab all the time because they're not used to seeing critical levels like that because most doctors don't order this type of test. We were going to look at the actual kidney test called the estimated glomerular filtration rate. Now, this patient, in spite of her advanced prediabetes and hypoglycemia and all kinds of other problems, had perfect kidney function. The blood urea nitrogen it was perfect at 16. The creatinine level, these are metabolites of normal toxins that the body's just trying to get rid of. You know, the toxins that are released through normal metabolism, the body has to get rid of them through the kidneys, and those are nice and low. So the kidney's doing a good job. The filtration rate is above 100, which is super good. No sign of chronic kidney disease, and yet all the time I see levels under 60. When this drops under 60, 59 or lower, that's the beginning of stage 3 chronic kidney disease. That by itself quadruples your risk of having cardiovascular disease and dementia. Okay, so that's why we want to prevent the progression of chronic kidney disease, and we know how to do that. We know how to do that naturally, and these are some of the first clues associated with that. Okay, so that is let me see here. I wanted to vitamin D. I got it. Bottom line, if you optimize your vitamin D, many studies have shown that you can prevent 35% of all cancers just by optimizing your vitamin D. Now, when's the last time you heard that? you know, it's sad to know that very few health systems actually promote this. That this is research that's well established that you could get rid of a third of all cancers. That optimizing your vitamin D will lower your cancer risk even more than not smoking. Now, don't misunderstand what I just said. Obviously, you don't want to smoke, right? Because that kills about 30%. That creates about 30% of all cancers. Okay, so yeah, so it's good to not smoke. But if you did smoke and you had optimal vitamin D, you could essentially eliminate over 60% of cancers. What do you think about that, right? So the vitamin D is a critical test that you should have. The average blood sugar test, the hemoglobin A1c, will look at. Every point you drop that, your risk of nerve damage and kidney disease and vision loss drops by about 30%. So those are all kinds of, there's all kinds of good information in this handout that like the lipoprotein A, okay, which is responsible for 11% of all heart attacks, and yet hardly anybody measures it. Okay, that this is a genetic factor. So you want to know if you have this genetic tendency to overproduce lipoprotein A. I wouldn't know I had this risk if I had not measured lipoprotein A. I have elevated levels. Now I know what to do about it. And so that I don't have to just, succumb to a heart attack like my uncles and aunts have because they didn't understand their genetic risk. Okay, so all right, so basically doing all these tests that look at different cardiovascular risk factors, not just the lipid profile, okay, can increase your ability to predict your risk of heart attack from 50% to 90%. Much better odds to figure that out. Okay, so that's the handout, the handout Hello Healthy. Okay, that you can download free. Okay, so that I'm gonna minimize that. Now let's jump over just real briefly. I'm not going to go over this in any detail. The handout that is on memory makeover. Okay, so how to prevent Alzheimer's and reverse cognitive decline. The bottom line is that I've provided the entire chapter 10, which goes over comprehensive lab testing that would be appropriate if you're concerned about that for some reason. Okay, and so that'll be outlined there for you. Let me see if there's I'm not going to actually go over any details here. There's a couple things real quick. Yeah, let me look at this page and then we'll go on. Basically the bottom line is that if you have low vitamin folate, remember we talked about the MTHFR, methyl tetrahydrofolate reductase, a gene mutation. Well, that relates to the ability to use folate properly. If you have that mutation or you have a low blood level of the vitamin folate, okay, and it's in the lower third of the population, right, in the lower third of that reference range, you're 3 times more likely to get mild cognitive impairment. If your homocysteine level is in the upper third of the population, right, if it's above 8 or 9 or 10, okay, you're 3.6 times, over 300% more likely to get Alzheimer's. Okay, basically, if you're over 60 and you have a low homocysteine, so basically the average person rather loses brain volume, loses hippocampal brain cells at the rate of almost 1% a year. Okay, but you can actually reverse that if you optimize these nutrients and have a regular exercise program and a healthy diet. Having a vitamin B12 level less than 417 was associated with a 600% increased rate of brain volume loss. In other words, if you heard of brain atrophy or shrinking brain, right? That's what happens when you don't have enough of these key nutrients in your system. We're going to be talking about that next month in terms of how to know. But that's why we want to test to see where you are. That's how we decide what to do. Looking at your omega-3, EPA, DHA level, and so forth. Okay, so a lot more stuff that we could cover, but no time for that right now. Let's just go out now. And we already went over the handout. Basically, it tells you what's happening when your blood, when you eat certain foods 1 hour and 2 hours after. Critical to understand. That's what keeps you focused. If you eat something, your blood sugar goes sky high after you eat it, that would make you think twice about eating the same food again, right? Okay, and so and then if you eat a certain diet and then exercise immediately after that meal, you can lower your blood sugars in between 1 and 3 points for every minute that you go walking after that meal at 1 and 2 hours when you check it again. Okay, so check out that handout. I recommend this handout for everybody. Okay, all right. So we're left here with just a few minutes left, and I want to just highlight a couple things here, and that was the glucose tolerance test specifically. We looked at it briefly, but let me just kind of slow down a minute and go over it and see how this is a person who, they might have been told years ago that they had a little spike in fasting blood sugars, but they didn't really think much of it because, it wasn't diabetes. It was just a little bit of a high blood sugar. But when we did this glucose tolerance test, which means you go to the lab, right, to the regular lab, and then they do all the blood draw initially. You haven't eaten breakfast yet, okay, and then you basically after your blood is drawn, they give you a 75-gram glucola drink. It has the same amount of calories as a medium soda. A little bit sweeter because it's smaller than a medium soda. You drink that down, and then we check your blood sugars at the lab at a half hour later, 1 hour after the drink, 2 hours after the drink, 3 hours after the drink, and so forth. And so as I pointed out in the Memory Makeover book, chapters 4 and 5 of that book really go into this in detail, showing that not only are the spiking blood sugars really bad for your brain and your heart and your immune system and really every part of your body, okay, but then when the insulin levels rise, okay, significantly like they did here, they stayed high for the next 2.5 hours. Okay, so the blood was just swimming with insulin, and that insulin prevents the brain from detoxifying and getting rid of beta amyloid. Okay, and it creates more inflammation in the brain, creates more inflammation in the bloodstream everywhere blood goes, which is everywhere, right? And then a couple hours later, the blood sugars crash to critical levels, and now that's really bad for the brain. That's really bad for really every organ system because every organ system operates on sugar, okay? But that's why we need to eat in a balanced way, the right foods to stabilize blood sugars all day long so you're not going through a roller coaster ride every time you eat. Because that's what most diets, the standard American diet, the SAD diet, basically causes roller coasters and blood sugars and insulin all the time, all day long, and that's really bad for the brain. Okay, so the last thing we'll say with regards to these labs today is the Hemoglobin A1c Test. This is a real important test because it's basically looking at the how much sugar has irreversibly bound itself, glycosylated, glazed itself, caramelized itself to the proteins throughout your body, including your brain. And so most doctors say if you're under 5.7, which is the beginning of pre-diabetes here, okay, then you're fine. So they would say, oh, this is fine. But remember, this is a very insensitive test because even though I know this is a problem, the average doctor doesn't think it's a problem. But when you do the glucose tolerance test, you see it's clearly a problem. But a hemoglobin A1c test like this one misses 73% of all diabetes and even more of the pre-diabetes, okay, compared to a glucose tolerance test. And so when you look at insulin production at 1 hour, like this insulin was sky high, that shows that there's a real problem with insulin. And so let me finish by going over that question that we started with from one of our viewers. We say, hey, I've been diabetic for almost 30 years. I'm on some insulin now. I'd like to get off insulin. Is this the right test? Every single diabetic I see, even if they've had diabetes for 40 years, I recommend the 4-hour glucose tolerance test. In that case, I would check insulin at every hour, okay? And then we check the C-Peptide test at fasting and 2 hours to see how much insulin your pancreas is producing beyond what the combination is, as I mentioned, of pancreatic insulin and what you're injecting. So the chances are that everybody, no matter, even type 1 diabetics are insulin resistant, most of them, right? And so we can always reverse the insulin resistance. And in a type 2 diabetic, we can begin to regain some of the pancreatic function. It takes time, okay? We've done tests on this. We can see that the body is able to produce more and more insulin as you get on the right diet, the right exercise program, get on the right supplemental program, address what the hidden risk factors might be for you, which happens through comprehensive lab testing. So the answer is, yeah, go for it, because you're going to be able to improve your health, no question, no matter how much damage has been done to your pancreas over the years.
Well, thank you, Dr. Youngberg.
For the presentation. Do you have some questions?
Yeah, I want to highlight, people are asking questions about lab testing, whether Medicare pays for things and et cetera. And I'd like for you just to highlight that, at least through your practice, for things that Medicare or insurance doesn't cover, that they could come through you and you could pass on to them a substantial discount, I think, through either as
yeah, that's a good point. Many clinics that do more functional testing and do more comprehensive testing, like what we're talking about here, will help you access discount rate labs, where you can get up to 80% discount on labs. So you don't want to ever go to a lab and pay cash without finding a way to get a discount, right? If you still go to the same lab, it's just that you're working through an organization that has a contract. That's why our clinic has relationships with organizations that have a contract with the labs where they're able to give huge discounts. Okay, so you never pay cash directly to the lab. Now, in terms of Medicare or PPO insurances, the key here is that, of course, an insurance program is not going to pay for any lab that hasn't been documented in conventional medicine to be justifiable based on your medical history, which we call the ICD-10 coding or the diagnostic considerations. In other words, if your doctor's diagnosed you with diabetes, right? There's a diagnostic code for that we can use, and that can justify various lab testing. So the whoever you're doing the labs through has to be able to justify these labs, or else you're going to get charged. Medicare is going to deny that, and you're going to get charged for that, potentially at full price. Okay, so that's why you got to work with your doctor to decide what labs are reasonable to order through insurance and what labs would be reasonable to order through an outside option. There's all kinds of labs online that you can order through on your own, and there's still a physician overseeing it, but you can do that on your own. You don't have to try to convince your primary care doctor necessarily to order that lab, because they're normally thinking insurance based only.
Now, I just want to go ahead and throw this out there, because people are obviously thinking about this as they're watching this seminar, is Many doctors are not necessarily yet focused. I think this is a movement that's coming and it's already progressing throughout the country, but they may be working with a doctor who is not focused on this lifestyle medicine approach to finding root causes and then helping you identify ways you can change your lifestyle, et cetera. And so some of these tests, they're just not going to be on their radar. So if they approach their doctor and their doctor isn't open or knowledgeable about some of these things, can they reach out to you, as an example, and get some help through consultation with you if they want to do some, better understand what tests they should get and how do they go about getting those tests ordered?
Well, first of all, I'm not looking for more patients. I'm pretty full with patients, but I do take new patients from time to time. I'm not trying to discourage people from calling, but that's not the purpose of this webinar.
Right.
This webinar is to give information out and then be aware of it, and then recognize that the field of lifestyle medicine is actually the fastest growing field of medicine today. So that's the good news, is that more and more doctors and other health professionals are becoming aware and trained and certified in lifestyle medicine. And then there's the whole field of functional medicine, which is closely allied with lifestyle medicine, that they kind of go together really. And I do a combination of both, where we're figuring out what is the most functional thing that we can do, right? And so there's a very rapidly growing field of physicians that have more training in these fields. So there's all kinds of options out there. You just have to kind of search them out. But certainly there's a way to do this. And with the resources that we've given you today, you have a great potential to read over that, to recognize what's available, and then figure out what you need to do to really dramatically improve your health.
Now, I will say, because I have led some programs that Dr. Youngberg created. I've led some of those through my church, and I've had participants come back and say, well, I talked to my doctor and I shared with them what I had learned, and I really wanted to get more testing done. And they were able to work with me, and Medicare covered everything except one or two items. So, definitely don't feel like you can't go to your own doctor for these things. It just may be a back and forth dialogue before you get to the result you're looking for.
Yeah, and then just be careful how you do that. I'm all in favor of you talking to your primary. Obviously, you want to have a good relationship with your primary care doctors. Doctors don't necessarily like to be told what labs to order. They're the doctor after all. And so, they're initially going to be a little skeptical, or, oh yeah, I did this webinar and this doctor said do this, and they're like, who is this guy, right? And why should I, order the labs that he thinks is important? And so those would be all important questions that they would want to ask. But for the doctors that are, especially there's more and more doctors are becoming more and more open-minded and understanding that there's so much to learn. There's always something to learn. And those are willing to do a little bit of their own research, and they go like, wow, actually, that's a really good test. Like a new test just came out on oxidized cholesterol. And oxidized cholesterol is actually the main driver for cardiovascular disease. That'd be a good thing to know. It's not going to be covered by Medicare. Okay, but it'd be worth a little bit of money to find out, hey, how am I doing on these more advanced type of cardiovascular risk factor assessments?
Now, one more question along this line, and I know we need to wrap this up because we've already exceeded our hour, but I'm assuming that if people want to find a provider that specializes in either lifestyle medicine or functional medicine, like you suggested, I think they can Google this, for their local area to see, okay, who is certified in lifestyle medicine or who's making an emphasis of that. And some of them may have health coaches within their practice that are specialized in that. What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I'm as you mentioned, Susan, I was one of the founding directors of the American College of Lifestyle Medicine, which we started almost 15 years ago now. And boy, it was tough. We almost went bankrupt a couple of times as a national organization. We started it at Loma Linda University, but it's an international society of medicine now, with boards and everything. And we have thousands and thousands of physicians and other health professionals that have joined, and it's expanding rapidly. And so the American College of Lifestyle Medicine, check out their websites and you can learn more about them. And they're the leading organization in addressing things like reversing diabetes. I participated recently in a seminar series for doctors, 18 hours of continuing medical education on how they can learn to teach their patients how to reverse diabetes naturally using lifestyle medicine. There's a whole new world that we live in, recognizing that now official medical organizations are teaching other doctors and health professionals how to reverse diabetes, something that even 10 years ago was frowned upon even mentioning, like that practice. But we know it's possible. I've been doing it for 30 years, so of course I know it's possible. But more and more physicians are learning about it. And of course, I'm lecturing to medical students as well, and they're excited. They want to implement these strategies. So there are options available for you.
Very good. Well, thank you so much for presenting this information, Dr. Youngberg. And I'd like to share with everybody that our topic for next month, which will be on June 14th, again at 4 p.m. Eastern, 1 p.m. Pacific time, Dr. Youngberg is going to be talking to us about supplements. And that's really kind of the next step in the process. So we've tried to walk you through this whole Vitality series, kind of from soup to nuts about, the information you would need for health optimization. And so testing, we've covered that today in a very high level approach. Of course, there's so much to learn about testing, and you can read those chapters and that will kind of start you on that journey, so to speak. And then next month, we'll talk about supplementation. And while that's not the foundational thing, it ends up becoming what we call getting you over the top, getting you to your goal, finishing the race, so to speak, once you get those foundational things in place. So we look forward to seeing you then. And